Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Natalie Nathanson. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
It's so good to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So we're going to have a great conversation today. We're going to talk about companies that are pivoting. There is some kind of a change at the company level and how marketing can support that change. And you're actually going to walk us through specific steps, like a system of what needs to be done in order for the company to change correctly and achieve the new goals. So it doesn't have to be like completely new goals. It can be aligned for the goals that the company has, but it's a different direction, right? So it's either, you have a new product, or you have a different line of business, or you want to change altogether. Yesterday, I was interviewing Odette from a boutique cake company in Seattle, and she was talking how when she started, she had a cafe, and then she completely pivoted into that cake studio. So that's an example of a company that just pivots and changes. So we're going to talk about the step-by-step on how to do that. But before that, Natalie, let me introduce you more about your bio and who you are. So you are the founder and CEO of Magnetude Consulting, and which is a firm in the Boston area, but you service clients all over, right? And it's a B2B marketing firm that you pioneered a fractional marketing approach for small to medium tech-related businesses. And you also have experience before that working in the IT and tech arena in terms of marketing. So that's definitely an amazing background to talk about pivoting and changing, because that's what companies in that arena do, right? I mean, if all of a sudden they have a new SaaS product, or they decide to go into a different line, etc. So you're going to definitely tell us and give us examples of that. But before we start, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you decided to open your own agency, and anything else that you want to add in terms of the services that you provide.
Yeah, of course. So I founded the company 10 years ago. Prior to that, I spent my background in business to business tech related marketing roles. And I spent most of that time in in-house marketing roles. So essentially on the other side of the table from where I sit today. And I had been a marketing team of one at a startup, a marketing team of three. And in those cases, really trying to do everything and anything myself, but not necessarily having the full, resources or expertise to do justice to everything that was needed. And then I also spent 5 years at the tech analyst firm Forrester Research. I led the marketing team for the IT line of business. And there I was part of a 30-person marketing organization. So really taking the two experiences, the startup and a one-person marketing team, the bigger company marketing department where all the different skill sets are working together, and really saw what's possible when you do have a team of marketers working together. So when I started Magnetude, it was really to bridge the gap between what bigger B2B tech companies have in their internal marketing function and then what smaller companies need to be successful in today's environment. And I would say even over these 10 years, we've seen so much change in marketing and just the pace of business and kind of the way marketing needs to continue to keep pace with that. And also marketing really being an enabler to business growth at the most strategic levels of business planning. And I think that's some of what we'll talk about as we go through the process today. But then also down to day-to-day program management and execution. So that was really the impetus for starting Magnetude, was building a different kind of marketing firm than one that I had experienced on the in-house side.
Love it. So you took all those experiences and put it into your own company that can help people, businesses grow. So,
yes, exactly.
Right. So let's talk about the change. So let's say a company goes through change, any kind of change, right? Change of direction, or adding I mean, I guess they can go in the same direction, but if they're adding another product or they're going to a different market, that could be a change of direction, right? Because it's a different direction that they go to. In your opinion, where does marketing have to enter that stage? Is it in the planning, in the strategy? Is it after the strategy is done and then marketing gets involved? Because obviously marketing will have to enable that change, I mean, help with that change, right? Because marketing is when you take a product to market and all the actions that go around it. So when you have a new product, a new service, you have to take it to market, and that's where marketing comes into play. But do you have to start earlier in terms of in the strategic phase of the decision making?
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and I think companies often are starting too late or bringing marketing in too late into the process, and that's where a lot of the process that I'll talk about comes into play, is really bringing marketing in to have a seat at the table in that strategic planning. There's a framework that we often talk about at Magnetude, where if you put a company's growth strategy or go-to-market at the epicenter, there's a number of strategic inputs that fall into the marketing discipline that come before that to really help to inform kind of what the strategy and plan should look like. So if you're looking at things like market trends, what's happening outside of the market that is helping or hurting your business, looking at different positioning approaches for the company, looking at the product or service architecture, and how to leverage marketing to think about how to develop the product and the product roadmap. So those are some of the areas that happen at the very early stages that marketing can and should be involved in. Then from there, there's the strategic outputs for marketing. So you think about messaging frameworks and brand positioning and developing the cadence between marketing and sales. Where does one pick up where the other leaves off? And then third and finally is the marketing plan itself. And that's really the tactics that a lot of people think of when they think of marketing, right? So email campaigns and social media, trade shows and content and all of those things that are very important. But those are the things that happen after kind of all of the other elements have been kind of thought about and put in place.
Right. So what you're saying is basically everything is aligned, all the way from the top strategy all the way to the execution. So that's why marketing has to be involved at the beginning, which makes sense because it's definitely a very important branch of any organization. So let's start walking through the process. What's the first thing that needs to happen?
So the first step is really clarity. And that's really, clarity on the purpose of what are you looking to get out of this initiative? What are the desired outcomes? What is the scope of change and the guardrails? So how far are you looking to go? How far are you willing to go? And that really sets a bit of the tone for really how to start that analysis and planning phase. And I would say to some degree, really making sure that as a leadership or executive team, that there's buy-in and interest really to see it through and an understanding of what that'll look like across the different departments that are involved.
Great. So that's step number one. Definitely you have to have clarity. You have to understand where you're going. What's step number two?
So step number two is assess. And in that assessment phase, there's really looking at the internal environment. So looking at, areas of impact, areas of opportunity, developing that high-level understanding of requirements, how it impacts the different kind of functions or roles within the organization, as well as looking externally. So looking out to the market. Does this kind of new initiative put us in a new competitive set? What else needs to change in kind of how we go to market, how we sell, how we deliver the service or product? And I thought I could give an example just to help bring it to life a bit. So as we talked about a bit earlier, this can be applied to a lot of different business situations, a lot of business environments, and I can talk more about those. But I thought I'd give an example of a client that we've worked with on this, and it was a cybersecurity consulting firm that had consulting offerings and training services, and they brought us in really at the point where they were getting ready to launch their first SaaS product. And they recognized the need for really revisiting everything, right? So the clarity was really kind of, what does this do for our business? How big do we think this should be? How big do we want it to be in how we're thinking about our business overall? And then in the assessment phase, it was really looking at, from an internal standpoint, an example would be looking at the sales organization. So a sales team that's used to selling kind of high-end, high-value consulting services is very different than selling a SaaS product where we were looking to have marketing be the driver of leads and getting a lot more of the sales funnel supported by marketing. And so really looking at it from that perspective. And then from the external environment, thinking about who are the new competitors, right? And the product itself had its own competitive set. The package that they were now able to deliver between the consulting services and the software created some new differentiation for them. So really had a big opportunity. And so in that assessment phase, it's really looking at, what else do we need to be thinking about so that going into the next phase, so step 3 is strategize, that we really have all the right inputs to inform that strategic planning.
Absolutely. So who is involved in strategy usually in the strategic planning or the strategization in step number 3?
Yeah, so it should be cross-functionally, and there's some variability depending on the nature of the initiative or what it is that's changing in the organization. But I would say it's generally all the way up to the CEO, the head of sales, the head of marketing, head of product, and then someone from finance. And like I said, sometimes that there's more or less of those people's time. Sometimes there's other roles involved. But that really gives all the right people a seat at the table to look at, right, how does this impact what we deliver, who we deliver it to, how we bring this forth to our clients and prospective clients. And then, of course, what are all the cost implications of the investment itself? But also, oftentimes, there's things that need to change from the financial standpoint in terms of, how the services or products are delivered, what that means for product SKUs, things of that nature as well.
Absolutely. All right, good. So we got clarity. We assessed the I would say the feasibility and how realistic it is and what we need to do. Does it work? Does it not work? And from there, you create a strategy. And then step number 4.
So step number 4 is the plan development. And I would say there's really 2 key components that come out of the strategy. The first that inform the plan development. The first being that strategic decision making, right? So what are the approaches to take? That's where you circle back to what is the scope of change, right? How big are we making this? Do we need to rework our messaging, our positioning, our brand? Or is this kind of an offering or a segment within our existing business and we're not touching things at the corporate umbrella level? And then the second piece out of the strategy work is really execution against those strategic deliverables. So if there is, a rebrand or new company messaging or things like that, actually, mapping that out. And then the planning phase can happen oftentimes to some degree in parallel with the end of the strategy phase, because that's really getting a bit more tactical of actually building the project plan. So what are all the things that need to change? You can imagine kind of a big spreadsheet or system within project management software for each function within the organization. What are the implications on sales, on finance, et cetera? Looking at it from the HR standpoint, some of these new initiatives, what are the different kind of hiring needs or skill set needs that the organization might need on the other end of this? And really starting to build that into a resourcing plan with budgets, with timelines. And oftentimes initiatives like this will have some sort of launch event, whether that is, external out to the market, right? In the case of anything, a new offering, a new market segment, you want to use the launch as an opportunity to make a big splash in the market. But even when it's something internal only, such as, let's say, a company that's been selling, direct to the end customer, and now they're shifting to sell through channel and partnerships. That's not necessarily something you would announce to the world at large, but the launch is still an internal rollout and bringing all of your employees on board and understand the changes. So the plan is really working backwards from what that launch looks like to make sure all the right pieces are put in place. And then that really becomes a project management discipline that's working across the functions to bring all the right pieces of information together in the right place.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I would say, and recognizing that can be a moving target. So in an ideal world, you build the plan and then you execute. But all of us know the realities of business, things change, new opportunities or kind of priorities emerge. The product, if it's a product development, might kind of fall on a different timeline. And so there is a lot of that kind of agility that needs to be built into that plan as well.
Absolutely. And that's part of the project management. So I would assume that the next step would be to manage the project.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So you're moving from that plan development into the plan, execution, essentially.
And, absolutely. And that will be very according to the team, according to the product. As you said, there is a lot of evaluation. You're not just doing it in a lab, you're doing it in real life. So things, as you said, things happen. There is maybe there is supply chain issues and you can't really get the product on time. You have to pivot to another one, or you realize that this is not exactly, it's not going according to the plan and you have to change. So that's where the project management and the agility and knowing how to manage a project comes into play. Yeah. So let's say we manage, unless you want to, do you have any specific points that you would like to bring up in terms of project management?
No, I think just in that preparation, which happens through the project management is, right, there's things that happen across the organization that will be represented there. But specific to marketing, it's looking at things like the communications plan. So what is that communication outward to the market when that's relevant? So to clients, to prospective clients, to partners, investors, looking at all of those components. There's the internal communications to the different roles involved in the organization that need to understand what is happening and what is the role that they play or what do they need to do differently going forward. Then there's the materials, so creating anything that is net new because of this offering, as well as is there anything that needs to be revisited. So we have a client right now that just completed going through a company rebrand. They've acquired 4 companies and now have over the last couple of years and now are in the process of bringing that all together. There's a technology roadmap for that, but then there's also what is that new kind of brand and position out to the market. So looking at how do we now go back and update all of the materials with the new branding and all of that. So there's, the strategic elements of to manage through. And then there's some, hands-on execution, grunt work, if you want to sure. Look at it that way. And then the third marketing element is the programs. So what are kind of the campaigns to launch the announcements? What does the ongoing marketing support look like in this new world that the company will be living in?
That's great. So we went from, we had clarity, then we assess strategize, right? Then we do the planning. And then you go into project execution. Mm-hmm. And then what's the next step after that?
The next step is the deployment and rollout. So that's really whatever that launch looks like, taking all of the inputs and all of the information and materials that have come together. And now there's the deployment of that. And sometimes it's a bit of a kind of one and done, like flip the switch. And now kind of everything is changed in the new environment. And that just becomes the path forward. And other times it's more phased. So that's where it depends on what kind of change there is. For example, we have a client that is launching a new service delivery model for how they deliver their services to their clients. It's a very big kind of change and transformation for them. And it really touches most, if not all, parts of the business. But it also has significant implications for their existing clients and kind of what they deliver to them. And is everyone kind of going into this new model or not? So in the phased rollout, it's actually easier to launch first to prospective customers who don't know anything differently. They're coming into this new world, whereas clients, there's a 9-month window of how we looked to roll this out based on the different requirements and parameters there. So that launch phase might be kind of a week-long or month-long event, but it also might be over the course of 6 months or a year, depending on the nature.
For sure. And it also internal and external, right? Because you have to also make sure that everybody the entire organization knows about the new marketing campaign and everything that is going on. I mean, those departments that were not involved in the initial strategy, like customer service, for instance, so they know how to deal with the customers, and then you have the deployment for the entire marketing campaign.
Right, exactly. And like we talked about the agility and the project management, there's agility in kind of how this goes out to the market, and what is the initial market response? Has anything changed in the market landscape while this initiative was underway? So COVID, for example, is a great example of that. If we think of all the kind of changes and transformations that businesses had to make kind of in that first kind of week or month when everything started closing down. But then also just a rapidly changing environment, and companies had to do a lot of pivoting and planning. And so we sometimes use the analogy of changing the wheels of the tire as the car is moving. So there can be an element of that here too, where again it just requires that continual communication and adaptation from the different folks involved.
Absolutely. So what's the last step in this process?
So the last step is really kind of settling into the new normal. Is really okay. So now this is your way forward. We often recommend an initial postmortem. So usually within a few weeks of whatever that kind of launch event may have been, is really, what have we learned from this? How has the market responded? Looking internally. So sometimes there's a bit of assessment again. Take an example of anything that impacts the sales organization. Do our metrics look different than they did before? Hopefully better, but if not better, then kind of why? Is there more training needed? Is there more enablement needed? And then is there are there other bigger requirements that we need to be thinking about? Are there areas that surprised us if you're launching, let's say, into a new market segment? Are we getting more resonance from some segments than others than what we expected? And how do we leverage that as our go forward path?
And I think there is, as you said, there is kind of a loop, right? I mean, it's the feedback loop, right? And in assessment, it's again, you go back into the assess. I know assess is step number 2 when you're starting to pivot and change. But here it's also, you have to assess what's going on. And it's kind of like a mini repetition of the process, right? Because if something is not working, then you have to strategize again, you have to plan, you have to execute it, you have to deploy. So it's in a smaller scale, but you still have to have those components, right?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a great way to put it. Kind of that loop within the broader loop, and I think that's also a testament to we're talking about big business change transformation here, but this same process applies from at a smaller scale too. So in marketing, as you're just launching a new marketing campaign, there's a similar effort that goes underway, obviously with fewer impacts, fewer exposure from other parts of the business and whatnot that need to be involved. But this same process can be applied in a number of different planning circumstances.
Absolutely. So Natalie, that's an amazing, very, very detailed process. And I love it because our listeners can totally use it and implement it. So it's very important to have it laid out, right? Like that. But from your perspective, from your experience as a business owner, but also before that, as working in a bigger company and seeing all aspects basically of the business world, why having a process is so important?
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where marketing and strategy in general can feel a bit like black magic, and it can feel a bit kind of messy and unstructured, right? If someone says we want to change our go-to-market, or we want to launch our first product, or things of that nature, where do you start? And everyone wants a voice at the table in the organization, and there's a lot of people impacted, and there's people who might be concerned about sort of the negative impact to them if it doesn't go well. So the process really takes a lot of that ambiguity out, and really gives a disciplined framework for how to go through this. And ultimately, it's a risk mitigation and kind of opportunity identification, right? So the risk mitigation is let's look at what else is happening in the market. Let's look at how prepared we are internally to tackle this. Let's see if we need to bring in any new skill sets or invest in different places to make sure that this is a success. And now let's make sure that we are going through that kind of analysis and post-mortem to make sure, is this doing what we set out to do? Do we need to make any changes as we're going through? So that's, the risk mitigation piece. And then the opportunity is really back to that question of, how big is this? How big do we make this? What is this going to do for the growth of our business? And making sure to capitalize on that.
Absolutely. When you talk about risk mitigation, you also need to make sure that that process is being executed correctly. And that's where a company like yours comes into play because, you have the process developed, right? You have done it with many other companies. So then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that is the advantage of having a fractional marketing company. I mean, basically like a fractional CMO, right? So it means getting an external marketing company, getting you into a company, you and your team, where you bring that experience, that the process work, and then you just going into a different environment according to the company that you are servicing and helping, right?
Right, certainly. And I think, companies do this internally on their own all the time, and that can work very well also. But I do think the benefit when you're working with an outside firm is someone who's coming in that has that process, that can see through kind of all the day-to-day minutia and understands how to move it forward, what are the right inputs to take, how not to get stuck in certain areas, or how to unstick them when there's kind of different opinions on something within the organization on the path forward to take, and just that accountability to make sure that it's moving forward and at the right level. So even if it's being managed fully internally, we often recommend make it someone's, give it to one person to own. Depending on
Correct.
The scale of the initiative, it might be someone's job for a year to really kind of lead the initiative. And back to my Forrester days, that organization was always very good at kind of assigning resources to key initiatives. And if that means someone's role looks different for that duration, but giving it the attention that it needs, and that person is really chartered with bringing that through.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Somebody has to be responsible. So if you don't have the resources internally, then definitely hire somebody externally to do that. If you want to expedite it, hire somebody externally. If you want to bring additional knowledge and the skill sets and the experience and the expertise, then hire somebody externally. If you have the resources internally, still assign it to somebody that they will be the main stakeholder. So there is accountability. I agree with you 100%. So if our listeners go, okay, I want to talk to Natalie because Natalie can help me, or I have a question or whatnot, how can they best reach you?
Yeah, so I love hearing from folks. I am very active on LinkedIn. So always happy to connect with new folks through that, looking me up on Natalie Nathanson. We also have my company's website is magnitudeconsulting.com. We have a lot of great resources there. If you go actually to the resources section, there's a checklist my team recently put out that has key go-to-market questions. So in kind of a couple minutes, just seeing what are those questions we should be asking kind of the other folks in our organization around an initiative like this, and other kind of planning resources.
Excellent. We'll definitely include that also in the show notes so people can go and take a look at that. Natalie, that has been you've been a great resource of information and inspiration for people. I think it's like what I got out of it is like, yeah, change may be difficult, but it's necessary for business, and you need to be able to make the changes. But if you have a process on how to do that, it takes that, what you refer to it as a black box or black magic or something that is unknown, right? It takes the unknown out of it, and you go, okay, I have step-by-step actions that I can follow, and I can actually execute that change. And then the change becomes less scary or less unknown, and you can actually do it. So I think that's been very helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you. And I think it can be tempting to skip the steps, but then going back again to that risk mitigation, it's really kind of going through that process of the discipline that kind of yields the best outcomes.
That's exactly right. You have to have discipline in order to execute it, but then you can get the outcome. It takes discipline to get what you want. So I agree with that statement. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It's been wonderful to interview you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.